Hi, my name is Sarah Rosenbaum from Cochrane, Norway, and in this video I'll be talking about structure and readability principles that are relevant across all dissemination products. When thinking about how to structure information, you should always have your user's needs foremost in your mind. Too often we create information based on our own needs as producers of information. These aren't always the same as our users' needs. So your information should be structured so that people can find the key messages first and then dig for more detail if they want it. The key messages from Cochrane reviews for most people are the results, the findings about the main outcomes. You shouldn't make assumptions about how much or how little information people will want. Some non-experts want lots of information about their condition, and many experts prefer to read short, simple messages. So let the reader decide how much information is enough for them. You can do this by adopting a layering approach to your information structure. The top layer is what people read first. It needs to be short and include the most important information. When disseminating findings from a Cochrane review, the top layer should at least include a brief description of the results for all the most important outcomes, including the indication of the certainty of evidence. This is because a lot of people won't read anything more. If you report only one outcome, it creates an imbalanced presentation of the findings. That's why tweets are a little difficult medium for a top layer, because they usually have too little space. You can use tweets for other purposes when reporting results, like making people aware that the review is published. A top layer could, for instance, be a short summary or a bullet point list of key findings, or in some cases, like a conference poster, the title. The next layer includes a bit more detail for those who are interested in going beyond the top layer, such as more background information or the information about the methods. One example of this could be a short summary of a few pages after a first page of key findings. The bottom layer in this context is usually the full review. Layering is useful for everyone, but it's a conceptual strategy, not a recipe, so there are many ways to achieve it. At a minimum, you need to provide information about where to find the full review. A link to the full review is useful and it doesn't take much space, but it is actually only helpful in contexts where people have internet or affordable access to the library. So, your layers could be within one product, like this example on the screen, where the top layer is the key messages in a bullet list on the front page, and then each finding is presented in a brief but more detailed text. And finally, the effect sizes are in numerical formats with grade ratings. They're presented here in the summary of findings tables. Or you can use a layered approach across products, like here in this poster template example. The title area is the top layer. The poster body is the second layer. And the full review, accessed by a QR code that you can scan on your phone, is the bottom layer. When you work in layers, you need to be sure your messages are consistent across layers. You could make sure of this by always using basic building blocks, such as the plain language statements and information from summary findings tables, when you're reporting findings in any dissemination product from a review. Review authors can use this same strategy to ensure consistent messaging across the different parts of the review, the abstract, the plain language summary, results, and conclusion sections. You can learn about plain language statements and summary findings tables in video number 5. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about how people read. When people glance at a new piece of information, they tend to quickly scan it first and assess how relevant it might be for them and how much time and effort they think it will take to read. The way you structure and format information can have a big impact on that first impression and on people's actual decision to read or listen any further. Both before reading and even during reading, people usually scan the content. On the web, people are impatient and they usually read less than 30% of the text. The image on the screen shows a heat map of the reading pattern of one web page, compiled by tracking the eye movements of many people. The red bits are where people fix their gaze for a bit longer time, indicating reading rather than scanning. The most common scanning pattern is an F form that's visible in this image. First, scanning horizontally across the top, for instance, reading the title and maybe the first line or two of text. And then, for languages that are read left to right, people tend to move their eyes down the left side, reading headings or bits of the beginning of paragraphs, or maybe just looking at the first word or so of new lines of text. This should have consequences for how you write. You have to make meaningful titles and subheadings and paragraph beginnings, or other things that people look at like links. Making meaningful titles and headings and link texts are also really helpful for people with disabilities. You can also make a text easy to scan and read by the way you design it. At the very least, you should start with the most important content or make it easy to spot. Break up large blocks of text into chunks using white space and bullets, tables, images, graphs, boxes, etc. Use labels on tables or figures because people often read only these bits. Use short, meaningful headings and subheadings that stand out, placing keywords first. Use clear, clean, consistent typography. And avoid baking text into images for accessibility reasons. Ideally, you should also highlight keywords in bold and avoid using italics or all capital letters. And you should reduce the amount of information as much as possible. So what do we mean by clear, clean, consistent typography? If you don't know much about typography, there is a simple way to create a coherent, clean result. You can begin with everything in the same font, the same size, weight, color, spacing, etc. And then apply just one change at a time to create a visual difference between the items that you want to separate from each other. For instance, paragraphs or headings, titles, highlighted sections, etc. For instance, don't rush in and change the size, weight, and color of all the headings at once. Try changing just one of these things first and see how much of a difference that makes before changing other characteristics. The rule of thumb is change only what you need to change to create the right amount of difference and not more. Here's an example of a results text on the left and how it was treated typographically on the right to make it easier to scan and to read by chunking and differentiating the different types of content. Here's another example. This one shows the importance of using white space and making sure that margins align, like the left margin, and keeping lines of text short to improve readability. The last point I want to make is to remind you to reflect consciously about the context that people will be in when they view your product. By context, I mean the situation of use. Let's consider an example of context when reading a road sign. You're moving very fast, you only have a few seconds to read. Getting it wrong could make a big difference, especially if you're in a hurry. The lighting is good in this photo, but that's only half the time. Maybe you're in an unfamiliar place. Do you even speak Portuguese? The context of use of posters at a Cochrane colloquia is a bit like for road signs. People are usually just breezing by and they only glance at them for a few seconds before they decide whether to stop and read. When they do read, they often have to stand a ways away and the lighting is usually poor. The amount of information, the size of the text, the chunking of the elements, and the use of white space, all of that contributes to the reading experience. Luckily, this isn't about life or death. Take a look for yourself at the next 8 examples and think about the context of use and about layering, scanning, and readability, and about how all these factors, only some of which we have control over, contribute to a good or bad reader experience. This video is one of a series of videos that are based on the Cochrane Dissemination Checklist. The easiest way to find the checklist is to search for it online. Thanks for watching.